Imagine waking up one morning to find that Saudi Arabia no longer exists on the world map. No deserts, no king, no Mecca, and no oil. Such a scenario would deeply impact not only the Middle East but all of humanity, because Saudi Arabia is not just a country, it is a cornerstone of global order in religious, economic, and geopolitical terms. Saudi Arabia was founded in 1932 by Abdulaziz ibn Saud. However, the history of this land goes back much further. Mecca and Medina, located at the heart of present-day Saudi territory, are the birthplaces of Islam. Mecca, the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad, has been the holiest city in the Islamic world since the 7th century. Medina is where the Prophet migrated and established the first Islamic state. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, power struggles intensified among the regional tribes. Eventually, Abdulaziz ibn Saud unified the regions of Najd and Hejaz to form modern Saudi Arabia. The discovery of oil in 1938 catapulted this desert nation into the very heart of global politics and economics. If Saudi Arabia ceased to exist, the heart of the Islamic world would stop beating. Without Mecca and Medina, one of the foundational pillars of Islam would collapse. The sacred lands that host millions of Muslims every year for Hajj and Umrah would vanish. Since Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, its absence would not only disrupt worship but also deeply damage the sense of identity and unity among Muslims. Which country would take on the responsibility of this religious duty? Over 2 billion Muslims worldwide would struggle to answer that question. There would be a massive shock in the oil market. Saudi Arabia holds approximately 17% of the world's proven oil reserves and is the most influential member of OPEC. If the country were suddenly erased from the map, global energy markets would collapse. Oil prices would spiral out of control, and industrialized nations would face a severe energy crisis. The impact would extend beyond oil, affecting natural gas and petrochemical products as well. While a shift to alternative energy sources might accelerate, compensating for such a sudden loss could take decades. The disappearance of Saudi Arabia would create a major power vacuum in the Middle East as Iran sought to fill the void. Countries like Israel, Egypt, Turkey, and the Gulf states would be forced to form new alliances. This would completely upend an already fragile regional balance. Global powers like the United States, China, and Russia would also be affected, leading to new geopolitical divisions worldwide. Mecca and Medina are not just Saudi cities, they belong to the entire Islamic world. Their disappearance or abandonment would signify the loss of a vast cultural and religious heritage. The sight of millions of pilgrims circling the Kaaba would become nothing more than archival footage. Futuristic projects like Neom, Riyadh's modernization efforts, and skyscrapers rising from the desert would all vanish overnight. Investment plans worth $500 billion, along with the influx of global corporations into the Arabian Peninsula, would become relics of history. The country's drive toward modernization would be abruptly erased. One of the greatest archives of Islamic culture would be lost. Saudi Arabia is home to some of the largest collections of Islamic manuscripts and historical documents. If the country ceased to exist, centuries-old writings, sacred texts, and archaeological treasures would be destroyed. This loss would not only affect Muslims but also deal a major blow to the global cultural heritage. Countries that rely on Hajj and Umrah tourism such as Indonesia, Pakistan, and India would suffer serious economic damage. Companies, travel agencies, hotels, and airlines that organize pilgrimages for millions each year would face bankruptcy. Moreover, millions of foreign workers employed in Saudi Arabia would be forced to return home, causing major social and economic upheaval in countries dependent on migrant labor. The disappearance of Saudi Arabia would create massive voids not only in the realms of energy and religion, but also across global culture, science, history, and finance. Saudi Arabia is one of the founding members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) and holds a prominent position as a leader country in the Islamic world. While this leadership is often debated, the kingdom still serves as a central religious and political figure, especially for Gulf and Arab nations. Its absence would further fracture an already divided Islamic world. Efforts toward unity among Muslim countries would collapse, and political coordination would become nearly impossible. Even the organization of the Hajj could devolve from a centralized religious undertaking into a field of political rivalry. Thanks to its oil wealth, Saudi Arabia controls one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, the Public Investment Fund (PIF). If Saudi Arabia were to disappear, these vast investments would suddenly be thrown into uncertainty. Global financial markets would be shaken, especially in the tech and energy sectors. Chain reactions would ripple from Wall Street to the Tokyo Stock Exchange. The Arabic language, as the language of the Quran, holds great significance across the Muslim world. The disappearance of Saudi Arabia, the language's homeland, would dismantle much of the global infrastructure that sustains and spreads Arabic education. The madrasas in Mecca and Medina offer world-class Islamic scholarship and attract students from around the globe. Without these institutions, the religious propagation of Arabic would stall, leaving a major gap in Islamic studies worldwide. In recent years, Saudi Arabia has drawn international attention through its social reforms. Under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the country introduced transformative changes such as allowing women to drive, opening cinemas, and holding mixed-gender concerts. These reforms influenced not only the Saudi populace but also the broader conservative Islamic world. If the country vanished, the image of a modernizing Islamic nation would suffer, and reformist movements in other conservative countries might lose momentum. Hajj and Umrah are not only acts of worship but also massive economic enterprises. Nearly 20 million people visit Saudi Arabia each year to perform these pilgrimages. Hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops, and transportation networks are all tailored to accommodate them. The collapse of this immense system would paralyze both local economies and international companies that provide pilgrimage-related services. Moreover, millions of people who spend a lifetime dreaming of Hajj would see that dream shattered, causing emotional and spiritual devastation. Although often stereotyped as merely a desert, Saudi Arabia is home to unique ecosystems and endemic species across various regions. From ostriches to desert foxes, the Arabian Peninsula shelters a rich diversity of wildlife. It also houses some of the world's oldest fossil remains. The country's disappearance would result in the loss of this biological and paleontological wealth, denying the scientific community future discoveries and breakthroughs. In recent years, Saudi Arabia had emerged on the global stage through events like Formula One races, high-profile football transfers, golf tournaments, and international concerts. Through sports diplomacy, the kingdom carved out a presence in global media and tourism markets. Its sudden disappearance would lead to serious financial losses for athletes, clubs, investors, and event organizers. Moreover, the cultural exchanges and global interactions fostered by these events would abruptly come to an end. Saudi Arabia is one of the few nations to have successfully built colossal cities in the heart of the desert, a feat of modern engineering. Despite scarce water resources, the country developed advanced infrastructure, agriculture, and livable urban areas, symbolizing humanity's ability to achieve the impossible. If Saudi Arabia were wiped from existence, the inspiring story of a civilization flourishing against the odds in the desert would be lost forever. The erasure of Saudi Arabia from the face of the earth would not only affect the present, it would echo into the past and the future. Humanity would lose a substantial part of both its historical heritage and future potential. Let's explore the long-term consequences of this absence and what it would mean for the world. Saudi Arabia is the strongest political representative of Sunni Islam, while Iran holds a similar position for the Shia sect. The rivalry between these two powers affects a wide region from Yemen to Lebanon, from Bahrain to Iraq. If Saudi Arabia ceased to exist, Iran's influence would expand without restraint. This could escalate sectarian conflicts, intensify proxy wars, and lead to greater suffering for millions across the region. The land that is now Saudi Arabia was home not only to Islam, but also to many ancient civilizations before it. Remnants of the Nabateans, Lyhianites, and the kingdom of Dedan lie scattered across its territory. Archaeological sites like Al-Ula are still only partially explored. If Saudi Arabia vanished, the traces of these civilizations would be lost before they were ever fully uncovered. Humanity would understand less of its own past, leaving significant gaps in the pages of history. The disappearance of the birthplace of Islam would cause not just a physical loss, but a profound spiritual tremor. The absence of a guardian authority over the holy sites would leave them vulnerable to exploitation. Cities like Mecca and Medina could become tools of political manipulation by international powers, or fall into internal strife and destruction. For the first time in history, the universal reverence for these sacred places could be seriously undermined. Though often criticized, Saudi Arabia has recently taken part in several international peace efforts. Initiatives toward ceasefires in Yemen, normalization gestures with Israel, diplomatic engagement in Syria, and dialogue with Iran were all products of Saudi diplomacy. The country's disappearance would extinguish whatever fragile hopes remain for peace in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia had also begun taking bold steps, albeit late, on women's rights. Women were allowed to drive, enter the workforce, and participate more actively in higher education. If the country vanished, this symbolic and hard-won progress would be cut short. It would not only be a setback for Saudi women, but would also demoralize women in similarly conservative nations. The idea that if women could rise even in Saudi Arabia, we can too would be lost to history. Culturally, Saudi Arabia was emerging as a significant force, from traditional music to modern art, from Arab TV series to literature. Multi-million-dollar cultural projects, festivals, and museums aim to bring Arab culture to a global stage. The disappearance of the country would weaken the representation of Arab culture in the world and reinforce a one-dimensional view of the Middle East, especially in the West. Losing the birthplace of Islam would weaken the religion's connection to its origins. A world cut off from physical access to its sacred sites could become untethered from centralized interpretations of the faith. This would open the door to radical or distorted interpretations and increase religious manipulation. In a way, the disappearance of these lands would create a vacuum of religious authority within Islam. Millions of migrant workers from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the Philippines are employed in Saudi Arabia's construction, healthcare, services, and energy sectors. Most of them send money home to support their families. The sudden loss of Saudi Arabia would leave millions unemployed and plunge their home countries into economic and social crises, causing a domino effect that could destabilize entire regions. In one of the world's harshest geographies, Saudi Arabia transformed in just a few generations from tents to skyscrapers, from camel caravans to space programs. This story is an inspiration to humanity, proving that even the most impossible challenges can be overcome. If Saudi Arabia were erased, this legacy of hope would be lost in history's shadows and the world would lose a powerful example of human potential. Saudi Arabia is not merely a geographic territory, it is a center of faith, an energy giant, a diplomatic actor, and a cultural pillar. Its absence would mean the loss of Hajj for Muslims, a global energy crisis, the erasure of untapped historical relics, and a profound spiritual void for humanity. If Saudi Arabia disappeared, it wouldn't just leave a blank spot on the map, it would leave an irreversible scar on human history. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more.